Hi everyone, this is Andrew Prima, Ukrainian American, reporting from Ukraine. In today's podcast, 35th Week of War in Ukraine, I would like to cover following. The week started with Russian shelling of Ukrainian cities, fight for Kherson continues, and we'll talk about the Putin's loyal people and who they are. Russians started week with shelling all the energy facilities. During the week, the occupiers carried out more than several dozens of Shahid 136 kamikaze drone attacks on the Kiev region. Residents of Kiev were warned of emergency power outages for the indefinite period after the night attack of the Russian Federation on energy infrastructure. Ukraine armed forces have shut down 85% of the rockets and Shahid drones. However, within the last 2 weeks, Russian terrorists damaged 30% of energy infrastructure of Ukraine. Russians specifically aimed at power plants, electricity transmission stations, and other infrastructure facilities. Currently, the Ukrainian cities have power outages daily, not just in Kiev, all over Ukraine. The Russian terrorists plan to bury Ukraine in the dark and freeze population during the winter. At the same time, Russia is preparing an act of nuclear terrorism. The Russian Federation military is conducting unauthorized construction work at the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, and they actually construction doing some construction at the nuclear fuel storage facility, which they currently occupy. This may indicate that the Russian Federation is preparing an act of nuclear terrorism, said the Ukraine state energy company Energoatom. The company stressed that Russian construction is illegal interference in the nuclear power plant installation and a gross violation of both the terms of the plant's operating license and international requirements in the field of nuclear and radiation safety. According to the state energy company, 174 containers are stored at the nuclear fuel storage facility. The company said that exploding these containers would cause radiation contamination of several hundred square kilometers of the surrounding area. Fight for Kherson. This is the hottest topic of the war in Ukraine. The Russian command admits that the situation in Kherson is complicated for them. The offensive of Ukrainians in the Kherson region continues. Every day, there are reports on liberated new settlements by Ukrainian troops. The offensive is not fast there, it's brutal, but it's coming. Currently, there are thousands of Russians dying every day and hundreds of Ukrainians being killed in the region. The Russian army is retreating. Currently, new partially mobilized Russians are sent to Kherson. So, according to the Russian plan, these newly mobilized troops should settle down in houses and set up an enclave in Kherson. The goal is not to allow Ukrainian troops to enter Kherson and repulse the offensive. That is, they're simply thrown to a death, while the staff units of the Russian army retreated to the left bank of the Dnipro River. But they are only set there to delay the offensive of Ukraine military, but it might help them to stop it or delay the offensive campaign of Ukrainians for couple of days. Currently, Ukrainian troops are shelling the Russian positions that are still left on the right bank of the river. I just want to remind you that the city of Kherson is divided by the Dnipro River, and previously, Ukrainian artillery damaged all the bridges across the river, making it difficult for the Russian army to escape. Ukrainians successfully using lately supplied HIMARS systems that hit targets with the highest precision. reducing the number of Russians in the region. The Russian command admits that the situation in Kherson is very difficult. As they say, we are forced to export people and all the valuables. Valuables? Museums are looted, monuments are uprooted and taken away. So basically, they just raping and stealing from that land while they're there, and they're trying to take all the valuables they can back home. They're hoping they're gonna get back home safely. There are in fact they are in fact engaged in the deportation of the civilian population. They are moving all the goods to the left bank of the river using small ships and temporarily constructed pontoon bridges, which are also constantly shelled by Ukrainian troops. Well, as always, Russian propaganda does it best. In Russian Telegram and TV channels, they started saying that Kherson is no longer so important that it's difficult and almost impossible to hold it. And the military is explaining to Putin that keeping Kherson under their control will cost too much for the army and the Russian Federation. So people are already beginning to hear that that's it. We don't need it. We didn't really want it. However, the country aggressors still cannot admit that they are losing the region due to Ukraine armed forces' successful offense and the incredible support of our Western allies. But we all know Kherson region is the most critical region to return. If Ukraine armed forces will take Kherson region, it will cut off Crimea Peninsula completely from Russia, and there will be no weapon supplies, and Ukraine armed forces will be able to easily retake Crimea, and that will end, most likely will end Putin's regime. However, we all understand that leaving Kherson, of course, have serious political consequences for Putin. I don't think there will be an outright riot in Moscow. However, Putin's rating among the most prominent Russian supporters will plummet. The reason is because after the announced mobilization, Putin simply has no other stable support left. Even in small villages and towns of Russian Federation, people are shocked by the massive burial of the dead sons and fathers that return home from special operation in Ukraine in coffins. As a result, Putin's rating has been dropping sharply. So let's talk about Putin's main supporters. Who are these people who truly support him and driving this war machine? These are Girkin, Kadyrov, and Prigozhin, and former president and closest Putin's friend Dmitry Medvedev. So, Igor Girkin, he's a Russian army veteran and former Federal Security Service Phase B officer who played a crucial role in the annexation of Crimea by the Russian Federation in 2014 and later the war in Donbass as an organizer of militant groups in the Donetsk People's Republic. The next one is Ramzan Kadyrov in a key role for Putin. Is a Russian and Chechen politician currently serving as the Chechen Republic's head. He was formerly a member of the Chechen independent movement and is a colonel general in the Russian military with his own army. He is extremely hated by the Russian Special Forces FSB because Putin allowed him to have more power than Special Forces FSB. Yevgeny Prigozhin is a Russian oligarch and close confidant of Russian president. Prigozhin was called Putin's chef. He runs the private army Wagner Group. By the way, Girkin, we talked about, and Prigozhin have now become colleagues because Girkin went to work for Prigozhin and became chief of staff in one of Prigozhin's division of the same Wagner Group. So, Girkin, Kadyrov, and Prigozhin are the most close and most loyal support group for Russian president. Putin highly relies on them. However, they have gained too much power lately, and any time might turn their backs on him. I would say the probability of power shift from Russian dictator Putin to one of his supporters becomes more realistic. Putin's allies or friends have never once allowed themselves to criticize Putin. They criticize only the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, individual military personnel. I will explain you why. It means the men they want slowly to take over the power by becoming in charge of all the military personnel in operations. But for the future, I think that Prigozhin is a challenge not so much for Putin as for Russian elites for the future after Putin. Prigozhin and Kadyrov used their war to strengthen their political positions. Both of them are very ambitious. They want to go beyond the roles they had. Kadyrov is a purely regional leader, and now it looks like he is ready for a bigger role, perhaps even at the federal level. Prigozhin, at the same time, is ambitious as well. He was a functional tool in Africa, Syria, and other special operations outside of Russia. But now it was the war in Ukraine that gave him the opportunity to strengthen his influence, and it seems that indeed his ambitions have become bigger. He claims the role of such an exclusive tool of Putin. Particularly, information was made public just the other day that Prigozhin was given the authority to form voluntary military formations, which include the private army called Wagner Group. What connects Kadyrov and Prigozhin? Both of them have their own armies. Other political figures do not have their own armies. And these armies are still being used against Ukraine, although in Kadyrov's case, they're rather blocking units. Putin SS used for punitive functions. And for Prigozhin, these military units are real. Moreover, these are heavy weapons and planes there. They supply very heavily with modern ammunition. They receive much better weapons and ammunition than regular Russian military units. But that's what I paid attention to. Suppose we're talking about Prigozhin and Kadyrov. In that case, there are deep and very strong contradictions. There are different strong contradictions between them and their armies in official power structures of Russia, especially the armed forces and special forces of Russia. Russian military simply hates Kadyrov and Prigozhin as well, but especially Kadyrov because he put himself over the Russian army. When Putin gave Kadyrov the rank of colonel general, as some Russian military experts have written, it caused personal indignation among the rank and file Russian military. And this is a new line of contradictions which will also affect Russia's internal political situation, not so much now, but in the near future for sure. Prigozhin doesn't pretend to be a part of the state structure, although some sources say that he's claiming the role of the new Minister of Defense. That is why he attacks both Minister of Defense Shoigu and the head of the General Staff of the Russian Federation Gerasimov. Will Chechen Kadyrov, and Prigozhin fight each other? I don't think so, at least for now. Both of them are Putin's tools. Rather, the current opponent of both is the military leadership of Russia. But what's next when Putin is gone? Kadyrov and Prigozhin will definitely become players, but within Russia, and their armies are their main resource which they can use in the struggle for the redistribution of spheres of influence in Russia, or even for the formation of their already independent quasi states entities. I don't even rule out such a scenario. And what will happen next, you will ask? Let's see. Now it's obvious the tensions around Putin are growing. This disagreements between different groups is intensifying, which are already beginning to divide the legacy of Putin, who is still in power. But even in Russia, they are already guessing what will happen after Putin. Russian oligarchs, in other words, Russian elite, started to think badly of Putin in Moscow. The Economist magazine wrote lately that the Russian elite is considering a future without Putin, and if, before the removal of the dictator, seemed unthinkable to the top officials of the Russian Federation, now such an option at least can be considered. There is a lot of cursing and angry talk in Moscow restaurants and kitchens, says one of the representatives of the Russian elite. Everyone understands that Putin made a mistake and most likely will lose. This doesn't mean that Putin is about to retire or use nuclear weapons. However, it means those who run the country and owns its assets lose confidence. Russia's political system appears to be entering the most turbulent period of its post Soviet history. Putin cannot win this war because from the very beginning it didn't have a clear goal. And having lost so much, he cannot go away with without being deeply humiliated. And a military defeat might well lead to the regime's collapse with all the risk for those who supported that. Thank you for listening. Please share our podcast with your friends. The world must know what Russia is doing to Ukraine, and Putin must be stopped.